Alright everyone, the Hungarians are prepared to fight the European Union over their bureaucratic abuse. You see, the problem is this. Hungary has decided they're tired of dealing with some of the slimy, backstabbing NGOs, the non-governmental organizations in their country that have ties to George Soros, because they see him, they say, well, he basically wants to destroy our country and all these other Eastern European nations. He wants to help the EU, the people in Brussels, destroy our cultures by forcing us to take millions and millions of economic migrants. Now, the refugee crisis is a totally separate issue. There are a handful of refugees in these countries. We're talking about economic migrants. We're talking about people who have nothing to do with Syria and Iraq. They're not destabilized individuals. They're economic migrants. Now, why they would want to go to Hungary or Poland is beyond me. I don't even think the Hungarians or the Polish or the Slovaks would care if it were refugees that were going to be sent there. What they see, though, is they look at, like, the news from Sweden or Germany or the UK or France, and they see that a lot of these individuals, they're not refugees. They're not Syrians. When people say, oh, well, most of the people coming over, like, they're female or they're kids, you're talking about refugees, which now is the minority within this huge movement of people. You're not talking about economic migrants. The two keep getting conflated. People are so dumb. Look, people on the left and on the alt-right, they make the same fucking mistake. The people on the left, they say, oh, we've got to take mercy on all these women and children. Yeah, that's fine. Those are refugees. We're talking about economic migrants. The alt-right says, oh, they're all fighting age males. You gotta split the two up, because otherwise you destroy your own argument when you're trying to talk to people who are more centrist. They're like on the fence or something. You come off as being unhinged because they see these like propaganda images that are of refugees. They conflate it with everybody who's coming into Europe right now. There's a difference between the people that are on like some wait list in Turkey and march across, and people who are like coming up across into Italy from Libya or Tunisia or something. It's a totally different situation. Like, people are nuts when they don't understand this. They're two totally separate groups of people. Here's the thing. The Hungarians are tired of this shit because they realize what, people who are sane understand, which is that folks like Merkel and Theresa May and Macron and stuff, they don't see a difference between these two groups. They call in great moral applause on the people of Europe to accept the refugees, be nice to these folks. They've been dispossessed of a homeland. We must care for these starving masses, these huddled masses. And at the same time, anyone who says, well, yeah, that's fine, but a lot of these people have nothing to do with it. They're not refugees. In fact, according to like the legalese of the UN or the EU itself, they're not classed as refugees. They're migrants. They shouldn't be coming here. Oh, shut up, you bigot, essentially. Like, the person is averse to anybody entering Europe. They're just a total skinhead. They have swastikas all over them or something. Like, that's what Brussels and Merkel and all these people want you to believe about folks that are opposed to limitless economic immigration. They want you to conflate the refugees with the economic migrants. Because they know, oh yeah, there's a problem with all these hundreds of thousands of migrants every year coming into Europe. But let's fixate on the lesser number, which is the refugees, which balloons up for a while, now has petered out because there's not a whole lot left. Is there anyone left to be a refugee, like in Aleppo or someplace like that? Is there actually still a major population there that's capable of fleeing and needing to go to Europe anymore? No, not really. Like, half the population already fled somewhere. They're already gone. Half of them fled to Assad's forces to take shelter with the government they're used to. The rest of them said, fuck it. They up and moved because of civil war, promulgated by the Western world's fixation on wanting to get rid of Bashar al-Assad, which itself was dumb. So, like, can you imagine if they get their war in Iran that people like Clinton and Bush and Obama have always wanted? If they actually get their war in Iran, you realize how many refugees that'll spawn? It'll make the current wave of refugees look tiny by comparison. And then you're going to see a lot of Islam on Islam violence because they'll all be Shiites. So they'll be going among the Sunni majority of refugees and immigrants that are in Europe now, and they'll just slaughter one another. They'll slaughter one another literally to try to control the native population of Europe. It'll be the same sectarian violence you get in these other countries. It's sectarian violence doesn't begin and end at the European border. The Europeans are so ethnocentric, they think, well, here in Europe, in Eurozone, in Euro paradise, it could never happen here. Yeah, look at the acid attacks happening in the UK. You know what the UK's government's response has been? Oh, we're going to regulate acid more. Like, you can't fucking manufacture it. Like, anybody who studied high school chemistry can't make an acid. You're dumb. You don't know what you're talking about. It's nonsense. Like, oh, we're bin that knife. We're gonna make you have an ID in order to get a butter knife. Yeah, like somebody can't take a handful of nails and form them into a shiv or something like that using a blowtorch or something like that. Like, they can't manufacture their own bladed weapon. Like, they're too dumb to do that. Okay, so maybe it's not quite as refined as what you bought in the store. Who cares? They can still manufacture it. Oh yeah, this old car, plenty of metal in this. I think I'll make some swords or make some arrowheads or something like that. Well, people of Europe are going to start slaughtering one another over this issue. Meanwhile, the Hungarians and the Polish in some of these groups actually stand up against Brussels. What does Brussels do? Oh, we're going to sue you for... You didn't take enough economic migrants. You're trying to keep out NGOs that are trying to literally destroy your sovereignty. This is how the EU dies, by the way. The split between Eastern Europe, the Iron Curtain states, and the Western Europeans will rip the EU apart. With the same fervor that the economic situation will. Look, you've seen it a few years ago. You had all of this, like, we're going to have Spegxit and Ital-exit and Grexit and all this stuff like that because of the economic situation. Like, Brussels is like, you're going to impose austerity. You're too far left. Meanwhile, here, we need more social spending because we're too far right or something like that. And so you have a differential patchwork Europe of different economic situations, economic realities, that starts to tug at the fabric of the European Union. The refugee crisis, which is really the migrant crisis with some refugees sprinkled in, because they're now the minority within that group. You get like 20, 30,000 people coming into Italy in a single month. It's a lot of fucking people. We're talking a town's population right there in a single month. That's going to rip it apart even faster. But it won't be North versus South. It won't be like Scandinavia, Germany, France, UK, sort of the wealthy economies versus like the more backwards economies like Italy or Spain or Portugal or something. It won't be North versus South. It'll be East versus West. It'll be Eastern Europe that remembers what it's like to be enslaved by a post-national authority, wants cultural homogeneity and or, in some cases, racial and ethnic homogeneity. The nationalistic side of Europe that doesn't understand what the fuck the Western Europeans are talking about. And Western Europe, that they're multicultural, they want diversity, they don't see a problem with limitless migration, and they can't understand, they call like the Polish Nazis or something like that. At some point, these two sides are going to break up. You won't have a European Union. You may end up with a European Union that's Western Europe, with a Southern European-style currency union that's, you know, these leftist economies, and then Eastern Europe nationalizing. And with the UK out, they'll probably drag off all of Scandinavia with them. I know Norway is not in the EU, but they'll grab them up. They'll grab up Iceland and Denmark and Sweden and some of these other states and form their own bloc. You'll end up with 4 Europes, or something akin to that. That would probably, by the way, be a good outcome. It's not, I'm not saying this to like doom and gloom, Europe has fallen. No, that would be the best thing for Europe. Because then the economic and social situation can be more easily managed. It will be easier. It'll be easier for them to respond to military aggression too. Like the Eastern Europeans are like, we're going to buff up our military budgets unilaterally. Because the EU army idea is not going to work. We're strong in NATO. We're going to increase our military spending because we're worried about our Russian neighbors. We're kind of getting worried about Merkel, I think, in some cases, too. The Western Europeans, meanwhile, they're like, oh, should we or should we not remove this impediment to the pension system? They're talking about pensions and welfare and diversity and tolerance and disarming people. They're not interested in talking about defending themselves. They're not interested in talking about economic pragmatism. And like always, the Western European ethnocentrists that they are, they lord over Southern Europe and they lord over Eastern Europe and assert that they are superior to them in some way. They assert that their culture is so wonderful. They're doing the same thing they did 100 years ago. 100 years ago, they said, our cultures are dominant. We're going to be imperialistic now. We're going to conquer you all because you're like savage or something like that. Now they do the same thing. Only now they say, oh, we're still superior. Only now we love multiculturalism and diversity. But we're still basically imperialists. We want to export this model. We want to aid these NGOs in destroying your sovereignty. And you should shut up because we're going to sue you if you disagree with us. The best thing that can happen is that all of Eastern Europe secedes from the European Union. Form your own bloc. It will be economically stronger. You can tie yourself more closely with the UK and US, trust me. In the future, you're going to want to work with us a hell of a lot more than you're going to want to work with Merkel or Brussels. Let the Western Europeans have their first world bloc. That's just fine. They'll have plenty of technological literacy that they then strangulate by the way of the bureaucracy. Don't keep giving yourselves brain drain trying to appease the people in Brussels. Because it's not going to work long term. Short term, yeah, it buys you a few friends and things go along okay. And when the rioting starts and your cultures begin to unravel, you're going to break free anyway. These populistic and nationalistic movements in Eastern Europe, these latent movements, are more popular than they are in Western Europe. What did we see in Western Europe? Wilders gains, Brexit occurs, Petrie's people briefly gain, some degree of control over the situation in Germany. It's still popular in a few regions. I think Bavaria and a couple of these others. And then you have France. You have Le Pen gobbling up more than almost 40% of the vote. I would say populism and nationalism has gotten more popular. 10 years ago, would that sort of margin, even in loss, be possible for any of these movements in Western Europe? No, absolutely not. It would have been less than half. We've seen this before with Front National's movement in the past. Far less popular. Eastern Europe, though, is not as averse to the concept of nationalism, patriotism, cultural homogeneity. If you want to rip the EU apart, all you have to do is keep abusing Eastern Europe. Russia doesn't have to get involved. People saying, well, the Russians are trying to crack the EU apart. Putin's sitting by laughing at Western Europe right now. He's laughing at Brussels. He's laughing at Angela Merkel, especially, above all people. He thinks she's hilarious. Why do you think he acts the way he does around her? He doesn't take her seriously. Because Western Europe has made a severe error in calculations. It's gotten to the point where it either has to severely loosen the European arrangement, in which case you don't really have an EU. Merkel doesn't have any power. You'll never get your empire or your army or anything like that. You'll have a very loose confederation in which these states regain de facto sovereignty. Or you tighten the noose, highly federalize it, make just one Europe, and all of these groups will split away before you get the chance, by the way, to implement such an arrangement. Either way, the European experiment has failed. And it's failed because of Western Europe, not because of Eastern Europe. Oh, these evil Nazis, these bigots over here. They're not being bigoted, they're worried. They're worried because they've been in a situation before where foreigners were marched into their land and resettled. It was called the days of the USSR. They remember this, some of them. I'm not surprised that they're averse to the very concept. I think they remember what overt centralization, post-federal models, and forced migration and things. I think they remember all of these things, and censorship, and political correctness after a leftist fashion, in vogue in the USSR, of course, as well, to be opposed to those evil chauvinistic Westerners or something like that. That's the problem. They're not going to go along with it. Hungary won't. Poland won't. I think that half of these states are likely to split off. I think you're going to see a massive exit of Eastern European nations, with Poland at the helm managing things ideologically, in all likelihood. It will be more nationalistic. It'll be its own confederated sort of system. And it'll be a hell of a lot easier for us to work with. Look, the U.S., I know if I was in that position, I'd rather work with Eastern Europe. I wouldn't want to work with somebody like Merkel, who constantly talks about how wonderful she is, while at the same time, she's like total far leftist, and at the same time, then she takes up these weird, generic sort of far-right issues, like, oh, I'm against gay marriage, I'm a Christian, something. It's like, what are you talking about? The Germans take this seriously. I think that's the greatest surprise here, is that there are actually people who think that she's a serious world leader. They actually say, oh, she showed up Donald Trump. She showed up Vladimir Putin. She is now the leader of the West. Are you nuts? Germany leading the Western world? That sounds like a great idea. I think we've had situations in the past where that was attempted. I don't think it worked very well. No. Yeah, and then I see her schmoozing it up with the neo-Ottoman Erdogan, and I think people get a little bit more worried about the similarity with the First World War at least. I think people are slightly concerned about that. I know I would be if I was in Hungary. Be like, oh, Brussels wants Soros to come in and overthrow our system, to overthrow the representative system, on the token that Western European ideology is so far more intellectually superior that it has to be forced on other people. That is, if it's a good idea, why do you have to force it on the Eastern Europeans? Wouldn't they just adopt it on their own? Oh, but though they don't know what they're talking about. They're less developed technologically, so we're intellectually superior. No, you're not. You just happen to have more wealth because of imperialism in the past. You happen to have more wealth because of partnerships with the US, and we gave you importance as part of various deals to beat up on Nazis and communists and stuff like that. You got all sorts of goods, you got all sorts of investment from us. Meanwhile, Eastern Europe had to suffer under the hands of the USSR. That's why you're more wealthy. Otherwise, you'd be a potato patch and they'd be the ones that were wealthy. There's no difference in resources. There's really no difference. That's about all. Peace out.